Yep, sure did. It was everything we said we didn't want to do did occur. And so starts with me, got to figure it out. Got a long flight home and some days off to do that.
How tough was it just to try to get anything going sort of in the passing game, to get into a rhythm?
Yeah.
What was the challenge there?
I mean, precisely when I talked about what it took to win this game and did a whole film, my meeting yesterday, it was everything about staying on schedule, being able to get multiple runs off back to back so that we can run it, stay on schedule, stay balanced, and we didn't do any of that again.
How distressing is it for you when you laid it all out over the week that you have to avoid A, B, C, and D, and then it just still pops out again?
Yeah, it's definitely frustrating, but you just like everybody else in there, you got to look inward first. Like, what am I doing as the head football coach that's not clear right now? How am I communicating these things? How are we practicing these things? That's what I've got to look at, right? I mean, I've got to look at the whole thing ultimately, but not going to stand up here and blame these players. It starts with me.
You talked about earlier that you kind of knew what this team's identity was earlier in the season, physical.
Yeah.
Have you lost a little bit of that?
I mean, I definitely think that some of the some of those things have hurt us, like being over aggressive and being amped up in the last couple of weeks has actually been a negative in some ways in terms of the penalties and some of the mistakes we've made. You wouldn't have guessed that we were here for a week prepared, ready to go play in this atmosphere by looking at it in terms of the way we started the game. I'm very proud of our defense specifically in the second half of the game, like played their tails off. Obviously had a couple moments where, we got the one obviously thrown over our heads again in a short yardage situation, but they gave us some stops and some opportunities in the second half. And we drove it and did some things with it. It's just ultimately didn't execute once we crossed the 50. Typically, we weren't being able to execute. So, definitely frustrating.
Now, this level of concern over Cam this week, second week in a row.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, you feel for the guy in terms of wanting to put him in a position to be successful. I thought about that decision a little bit because it was 21-0 at that point. You just kind of wanted to get some points on the board to see a little positivity when you looked up at the scoreboard. And we ended up missing it. So I just got to go talk to him before I comment on it. Yeah, we've obviously need to make sure that we're in a position, with our hands, with our violent to the tuck, with the way we're looking the ball in, and also ball plays, making sure the ball is in the right spots and not, all that stuff. I think there's a combination of things. Still, we got to keep throwing it though. I mean, we can't go running it. So that's just the way it goes.
Was that part of the plan, or was it more a result of lack of productivity elsewhere? How do you see him? Are you happy with his progress in terms of integrating into this offense?
Yeah, early on it was hard to get anybody into a rhythm offensively, and then, in the second half there definitely was a plan going into the game that we wanted to utilize him more on the offensive side of the ball, specifically trying to get the ball into his hands. And then the first half was just kind of funky, the way we couldn't get anybody the ball consistently, and get into a rhythm. And then he was able to make some plays in the second half. Trevor was, able to find him on some things that were obviously designed to go to him in some ways. So, happy that he got his first touchdown. Tough to see it come in that moment.
You guys have big plays taken off the board.
Yeah.
Penalties like the punt return.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely kills it, for sure. Got to go watch the tape and see how we can coach our guy Jarian differently on the punt return, how we can coach him differently to communicate how to play that play differently in order to not have a penalty there. And then we had the punt return where they obviously, they knock into him or whatever it was, and nothing ended up occurring. So it's just, we're trying to figure out how to coach them and communicate that stuff to our players, but clearly we've got to be more disciplined.
You talked about fixing a lot of things. How important is it going to be during this bye week to sort of get that process going and moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, that'll start on the flight home, that opportunity to watch the tape, flush the feeling in some ways, which won't go away for a little while, I'm sure, especially on a bye here. So we've got to look at the self-scout in all three phases. We've got to look at personnel in all three phases, how we're utilizing it, how we aren't utilizing it, where do we need to use guys more, use guys less. It's all going to get evaluated.
You said you spent 7 days out here. I work with young people, and I get to take them on residential trips, and you get to see like a different side to young people when they're away from home. Some of the players that's in the squad, probably their first time away from home. What have you learned about your squad that's different from when you get to travel around America? You've taken them across the Atlantic. What have you learned about some of these players?
Yeah, I think just like you're saying, the opportunity to see the world throughout the game of football. Obviously, it's frustrating to lose a game, right? That's the result that we're not hunting up. But I think it's still pretty cool experience to be able to have the opportunity this game of football has maybe brought some of these guys some opportunities that maybe they wouldn't have ever had. I definitely hadn't traveled much as personally in my life, and football has definitely given me the opportunities to do so.
Two quick ones and we're done.
In your first season as a head coach, what has been the biggest challenge in moving from offensive coordinator to leading the whole operation?
I think making sure, the relationship, not the relationship piece, but the communication overall, just in making sure you're present in communicating with not just the offense, but the defense, the special teams, the players, the coaches, the staff, making sure that the standard is continuously being communicated at a high level and that those standards are being upheld every single day in terms of the details, the fundamentals, the schedule, all that stuff that goes into it. Used to live in a little bubble on one side of the ball, and now that is definitely expanded.
You guys played a lot of soft zone defense in the first half, which Stafford's handily picked apart. Was that part of the game plan, and did the absence of Coen have anything to do with that?
Yeah, we tried playing a little bit more man, and it seemed like when we did that, we were getting a penalty called on us some way, shape, or form. So we were trying to find the balance between going zone and man, the balance between sending pressures and playing with four-man rush. So that's a balance. When you play a guy like Matthew, you have to mix up the looks, give him different looks pre-snap and post-snap, and Matthew was on one today.
Thanks, Coach.